So it's no big secret, I'm a massive fan of the Pioneer DJS-1000, and I did a special video with Pioneer. If you haven't seen it yet, here's a teaser.
It's the weekend, you be freaking. It's the weekend, yeah, you be freaking. It's the weekend, you be freaking. It's the weekend, yeah, you be freaking. It's the weekend, you be freaking. It's the weekend.
You can watch that full video on the Pioneer DJ YouTube channel, but it got me thinking, I haven't done any videos on the DJS-1000 on this channel yet, my channel. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to deconstruct one of my remixes, one of my recent remixes of Soul Divide's Good Vibrations. I'm going to go through that in Ableton, and I'm going to show you how I deconstruct it, how I take all those parts and get them ready to go on the DJS-1000. And then I'm going to show you how I can kind of use them to live perform the track. Now this is something that I do with a lot of my tracks, it's something I like doing within my sets, and it gives you a whole load of possibilities. I kind of want to show you just how good the DJS-1000 is. Now I use the DJS-1000 in my sets in a load of different ways, and I'm going to be doing a video on that very, very soon, showing you some of those ways that I perform with it. But in this video today, I wanted to show you how I deconstruct one of my tracks that I've made in Ableton and get it onto the DJS-1000. And then with that, I can then perform the track live. Now, if you're a DJ stroke producer like me that has very limited live performance experience, then using the DJS-1000 in your set to live perform your tracks might cause you to come out in sweats thinking about how that can go wrong and how that's just so complex to be doing in the middle of your set. But the beautiful thing about the DJS-1000 is that it is as complex or as simple as you want it to be. Now I take my tracks that I've made in Ableton and I deconstruct them in a way that I can very simply perform them on the DJS-1000. By using a whole load of different layers and loops and one-shot sounds, I can recreate the tracks on the DJS-1000, either pre-prepared or live in real time. So it gives me a whole load of possibilities when I think about playing my track. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one of my tracks that I've done, one of my recent remixes for Soul Divide of their track Good Vibrations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export all the different elements of that and get it onto the DJS-1000, show you how I kind of prepare that to then play out live, and just show you some of the different variations that I do and things that it allows me to do with that track. So the key here is definitely preparation. If you've got your track in Ableton, you'll have any number of different layers within it. Within this remix, I have around about 25 layers. And on the DJS-1000, we have 16 pads. So we've got to get all that information, all those different sounds into 16 layers. So we've got to go from 25 layers to 16 layers. Now we don't have to use all of that, and we can combine some of this together. And this is where you start thinking about whether you want to play every element live. So some of it you could play as just simple loops. You could export them as loops, or you could have some one-shot sounds that you then play the melody of, or you can do it in any number of ways and combinations. So you can make this as simple and as hard for yourself as you want. So I'm going to jump into this project now and see what parts we've got here and how we can combine them into 16 pads. So the simplest thing to first look at is the drums, and that's usually what I kind of go for. Now, the kick is something that I separate out on its own because that's something I can easily program into the DJS, and the DJS, because it is an amazing bit of kit, has a way of side chaining. If you're not a producer and you don't quite understand side chaining, then do a quick Google on it. But basically it allows you to take elements like the bass or piano or whatever else you've got in your track, and it will duck whenever the kick hits. Again, it's a really complex subject, so Google it, find a YouTube video on it. But yes, so that's why I usually export the kick separately. So I might just export the kick as an individual kick. Now I do have that within MIDI within here. So what I can do is I'm going to zoom in and find where this is here. So I'm going to solo the kick on its own. So I could easily just export one of these kicks on their own. And what I'm going to do is literally just soloing it. I'm going to just select this area. So this is just one kick, and I'm just going to export it. So click export. So I always find it good to create a folder within your project for the DJS. So it might be a live performance folder, or it might be a remix folder, or whatever you want to call it. It's maybe stems or something. I'm just going to call this DJS, create a new folder within here, and I'm just going to put this as kick. So this is good. That's exported the kick straight from here. So I've got the kick. That's pad 1. Next up, we've got to think about the other elements. Now, the drums you could then deconstruct in whatever way you want to. So you could take the drums and just combine them all together as one loop, and then you just got them on one pad, or you can deconstruct them separately and then be able to use them in different ways. I don't think I'm going to actually necessarily play all the drums live, because it might take a bit of time to kind of bring each element in, and you don't want the crowd waiting while you're putting a clap in, and then a hat in, and then a snare in, and then something else in. It's going to take you a while to kind of build that up, and that's just going to bore the dance floor. So I might just actually export all these drum loops together, and also I can export all these loops and all these different parts and swap them out on the unit to see which works best. So I'm going to solo the drums, which I've got all grouped together in Ableton, and we'll just see how that sounds.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole load of drums in here, and actually I've got a vocal shout in there, which I think I'm going to separate out. So I'm just going to just hide that for now. And then let's export this loop. Yeah, so I think that's enough of a loop to be able to use that, and I'm just going to export that. And I'm going to call this, well, it's a tops loop basically. It's got all the tops within there, so I'm going to call that tops. Now I say I've got that yo sample in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put that in. I'm going to do that separate. Now the reason I'm doing that separate is because I think I might be able to use that a bit differently within the unit. Now what you can do is you can actually sequence up all of these so that they're all in time. But I might want to kind of throw it in more occasionally than it is within the actual track, you know, remix it almost live. So I'm going to export that separately. So again, I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to click on this and actually just export it as is.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's got a bit of reverb, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Now I'll get most of the reverb there, so let's just export that. I'm going to call that yo. So we've got 3 pads there already set up. 3. I can count. So that's 3 pads set up. Next up, let's have a look at the bass. Now the bass is actually in 2 different parts in this. So I have a main bass and then I have an 808 bass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export the main bass as its own loop. And in fact, it only kind of loops once. Yeah, so let's just export this here. Now, if you're listening on YouTube and you don't have headphones in, you're probably not going to hear this, but there is obviously bass there. So I'm going to export this. Now this has a sidechainer on it already. So I'm using the LFO tool, which is obviously sidechaining it. That's kind of ducking it under the kick. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to disable that because I'm probably going to do that live. So I'm going to have the kick there as one of the pads, and then I'm going to get it to sidechain live in real time, so that if I decide to take the kick out, which I can do with the DJS, then the sidechaining will stop, which is what would happen in a DAW. So I'm going to disable that and just have the bass come out as it is. So let's export that. Now all the levels I'm doing quite low at the moment. Now I can boost them within the DJS, and this may be something that you kind of need to then look at afterwards. What I tend to do is I'll go through all of the different audio files and normalize them. I'll bring them all up to a level, but I'll show you that in a minute. So I'm going to export that bass. Call that bass 1, and then I'm going to export the second bass within here as well. Again, that's sidechain, so I'm just going to turn the sidechain off on the LFO tool and export that. Call that bass 2. So we've now got 5 layers. You can see how we're just building it up, but we've got to keep within those 16. Now we've got the stab. Now the stab is something that is kind of very offbeat, so you can kind of hear it here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to export this full loop, which I'm going to have within there, but I'm also going to export it as a single stab. So I've got 2 options there. I can load the whole stab as a loop into one of the pads, or I can load the individual stab and then reconstruct it on the DJS. So I've got two options there. So I'm going to export this whole thing. And actually this is a longer repeating pattern, so I'm going to export the whole loop within here. So I'm going to call this one stab loop because this is the loop version, and then I'm going to export a different version which is the individual stab. Again, this one's got reverb on, so I'm going to make sure I've got all the tail of that. So let's export that. I'm just going to call that stab on its own because, well, it's a singular one. Next up, let's have a look at some of the other elements. Now we've got a pad going on within here that goes within the breakdown. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this pad. We can do some more interesting things. There's a whole load of effects on the DJS that we can then kind of transform this a bit with. So I'm going to do exactly the same with that. So just make sure there's no ducking with that. No, there's no ducking with that. I've frozen it because it was using quite a bit of resources for some reason. So I'm going to export that piece there. I'm going to call this pad. So we've now got 8 samples within there. That's half of the bank of samples that we can use. So we've already got most of the track kind of within there, which is a really good sign. That means we can start playing around a bit. We can find some other elements now. Now we've got the crash within here. This is something that I would play individually. So it's going to be a one-shot sound. So I'm going to export that separately. It's got a bit of a tail going on, so I'm going to make sure that I get all of it. It's always kind of a good idea when you're doing this kind of thing to export more than you need, because you can then always trim it down on the DJS. So I've done 2 exports of the synth stab, so I can either use it as an individual one hit and then reconstruct it on there, or I can use the loop. I might not load both of those things into the DJS, but at least I've got the option to then do it. It becomes more and more confusing when you're going between the computer and then to the DJS and then back again, trying to make sure that you got it all right. But you know, at the end of the day, this preparation, this is why you're doing this preparation, so it's all ready and done. So we've got that within here. What else have we got? It's got some effects within here, I think. So I've got this pad sound going throughout. I don't know whether I'm going to use this. I might just use this. In fact, I'm just going to export it as a really crude loop. I don't think when I'm playing it out, people aren't going to necessarily notice that it doesn't loop properly because it's going to be layered with everything else. Or at least I hope so anyway. So let's export that as a loop. I'm going to call that ambience, maybe. Just a little bit of something in the background. So I'm going to call it ambience. And then what else have we got within here? We have, I think, a scratching sound. Yeah, so let's get the scratching sound in there. That's always good. Again, because you're live performing this, this is something that you could do with one of the decks, maybe. You know, it's one of those things. It kind of looks better. But for this intents and purposes, I'm going to use the sample that I did in the original track. I'm going to call that scratch loop. It's a very, very short loop anyway. And then we have another sound within here. I'm not sure what this one is. Oh, just a simple female vocal within there. We haven't actually tackled any vocals yet, so that's going to be a really interesting one. But I'm going to put this one in here for now. That's just a good vocal within there. I'm going to prefix all of the vocals with Vox, just so I kind of know very quickly. You don't have that much of a display on the DJS to see what the sample name is. So you need to kind of see the most valuable information at the start of the sample so you know what it is. So you might need to rename these until you kind of get into the practice of kind of keeping those names short and knowing what they are. So I'm going to call this just Vox Good. Vox Good Stab, maybe. So we've got most of the elements within there. We've got the kick, we've got the top loop for the drums, we've got both elements of the bass, we have the stab within there, we've got a couple of variations for that, for how we want to use it. We've then got the pad sounds, we've got the crash sound in there, we've got the scratch in there, and we've got one of the vocals. But we've also got a whole load of stuff, obviously, from the original track, which is a lot of the vocals. That's the most interesting part. Now we've got this kind of this ragga sound, which is this kind of sound system kind of thing, like kind of siren-y kind of thing going on. So that's really cool. What we can do is we could have that as a one hit on there, and when you hit the pad, then obviously it's going to trigger that, and you can do it multiple times and do some really interesting things in breakdowns, I guess. You could even use it on another track. Then this is the whole point of being able to do this with a track that you've got all the elements from it, so you can just play them whenever you want to. So you don't have to play the whole track. You could put some vocals over the top of another track that you're playing, or put this kind of siren sound over the top of something else. Gives you so many possibilities for how you play that track. So I'm going to export that in its entirety because it's got a long tail there. It's kind of delaying for quite a while. I'm going to call that siren because it makes more sense to me. And then we come to the vocals. So this is the main part of the track, and I've got a whole load of different variations where I kind of play with the vocals. So we've got the full passage of the vocal, which I think is here.
It's such a good vibration. It's such a...
So I have, in this remix, I've kind of used the vocal and I've looped it up quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to create a loop of that. Probably a few variations, so we've got that, but I'm also going to have the whole I'm going to use the vocal in a few different ways. So let's try this passage.
Good vibration. Good vibration. It's such...
Now, because I'm not going to save this version that I'm kind of editing here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to deactivate some of these clips here. So what I can do is I can get that long tail on that vocal, and we've got the full. We can use the full version with the echo within there.
Good vibration.
So I'm gonna use that whole passage there. So that's really the key kind of part. And then we got the lead up as well, which is this.
It's such a...
Again, that's the part that I loop quite a bit, so I'm going to use that as well. And that I can then use on another pad, or I can use it as part of this. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to export that as a full passage.
It's such a good vibration. It's such a good vibration.
And in fact, because I want it to be just that sample, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just disable the echo for now, because I don't really want that in here. So I should disable that.
It's such a good vibration.
So I'm going to export that.
It's such a...
So we've got all our samples now. We need to get them on the DJS, and that is done via USB stick, just like we do with the CDJs. Now with the CDJs, obviously you have record box, and you can kind of prepare all your tracks within there, then export it onto the USB stick and plug it into the CDJs. Now you can do the same thing with the DJS. There is a piece of software specifically for it and for the SP16. It's called the Project Creator. Now this is quite an early piece of software. It's very much in its infancy, and there are a few issues with it, and it's quite low on features at the moment. They are making it better with every single release, and there's more features coming to it. But for now, it's pretty much about just allocating the sounds to the individual pads on the DJS. You don't really have any kind of configuration options, and you can't really do anything else like that. Nothing really kind of substantial with it. So my advice definitely is to prepare it on the actual equipment. Now, obviously this is a pain. This means that you do need the equipment. But if you're serious about getting this in your sets, then you're going to need something to practice on. You're going to need this bit of kit to kind of plan your set, to be able to plan the tracks and how you play them out, and also practice with them. That's really important. You kind of need to know how things work together. And there are just so many functions to the DJS that I think it would take them ages to put everything in this piece of software because there are so many different options and settings and filters and effects and settings, and it's just so much stuff in the DJS. It's an amazing bit of hardware that put it into the software would be like creating another Ableton. There's just so much stuff to put in there. So whilst this project creator is a great way to kind of prepare your USB sticks and kind of get your samples into those pads, I find it just as easy to put them on the USB stick themselves. It's just as easy. You just put them in a folder, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So with your USB stick, once you've plugged it into the DJS or the SP16 once, it will create a whole load of folders for you. So next time you plug it into your computer, then it will automatically show those folders. So I've called my stick Torres just because I used to use the SP16 quite a bit, and now I use the DJS in my live sets. And the beautiful thing about this is once you prepare these, it will work on both. So you can easily use it on both. Quite occasionally I'll have the SP16 in my studio, and then I'll have the DJS in a bag ready to go on the road. But it's whatever you want to however you want to prepare. Obviously you're not going to have both bits of kit. Probably not anyway. So you can use it for either or either. I would say the DJS is fantastic if that's what you want to do within your DJ sets. The SP16 is fantastic if you're live performing. So as I say, the stick is already prepared with folders that are made by the DJS or the SP16. So you've got a Pioneer folder within here, and then you've got the DJ sampler folder within here as well. Now I have an extra file within here. This is an update for the SP16. So occasionally what I'll do is I'll put firmware updates onto the same USB stick. So if I come across a DJS or an SP16 that doesn't have the latest updates, then I can apply them straight on the stick. So within the Pioneer DJ sampler folder, you've got a whole load of subfolders within here. You have projects, samples, scenes, and system. Now the only one you're going to need to pay attention to is the samples folder. The projects are all maintained by the DJS or the SP16. You create them on the device, or you can create them within the project creator software, hence the title. So within the samples folder, this is where you kind of put all the samples that you're going to use. Now I have a whole load of individual samples within here from all my sample packs that I bought over the years. Generally, a lot of these are kind of one hits. Some of them are loops, things that I kind of usually use in my sets. Just a few samples that I know are going to work well. I've also got a folder in here called tracks, where I've kind of deconstructed tracks, and I've then made them into projects that I can then play out using the DJS. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new folder within here. I'm going to call this folder the remix that we've just exported. And then I'm going to put everything within here. Now this is my own organization. This is not how you should do it. You find your own way and how you want to do it, but this is how I do it. So I'm going to click into here. Now, one thing before I put all these samples onto the USB stick, I want to make sure that they're all at a decent level. I want to make sure that that volume is all a decent level. And what I can do to do that is I'm going to normalize them. Now, you can do this in most audio editor software. I could reload it into Ableton and do it that way, but it's just as easy just to do it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these tracks, and I'm going to open them with Audacity. Now Audacity's a free audio editor. You can use any audio editor you want to. As I say, I'm going to use Audacity because this will do the job that I need it to do. So it's going to load all these samples up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize them, which basically brings them out all at a proper volume, a volume that I can then use. Because on the device, I can control the volume of every single sample, so I can always bring it down in volume to kind of level them all up again. Again, it's a bit like a mixing kind of thing, so you're remixing the track almost. But I'm going to go through each one of these, so I'm going to go through, select it all, and I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to go to Normalize. And it says to normalize to -1 dB, which I think is going to be absolutely fine for this. Click OK on that. And now I just need to export it again. Now this might take a while, just going through each one of these, and you might find a piece of software that works a lot quicker for you. Again, it's whatever you want to use. I'm using Audacity because that's a free bit of software, so you can then go in there and straight use this if you want to today. You can download that. So I'm just going to export this. It's going to ask to overwrite it, which of course it is doing. So I'm going to do that. Okay, and I'm going to do is exactly the same to all of these. I wish there was a batch processing thing. Maybe there is. I haven't found it yet. So yeah, maybe I should do. Again, normalize. then export. By the way, this is the most boring part of the process. And yeah, I haven't found a quicker way of doing it yet. There you go. At least you didn't have to sit through that in real time. That takes a while to go through. And I'm sure there are easier and quicker ways of doing it, batch doing it, and probably even exporting it from Ableton with some compressor or limiter or something on it. But for now, I just find that an easier way of doing it. I'm exporting it with nothing on the master channel, so no limiters, maximizers, or anything else like that. So it's exporting it with plenty of headroom, and I'm just using Audacity just to normalize everything, so it brings it up to a normal volume. So now we've got those samples, I'm just going to simply drag and drop them onto the USB stick in that folder we just created. And that's barely 20 megabytes. That's almost exactly the same size as the MP3 version. And you've pretty much got all the elements for the track within there. And the next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the DJS and I'm going to show you exactly how I set it up on there and the different options that it gives you to be able to then perform with it. So we got all our samples on the USB stick and ready to go in the DJS. Now, as I said before, we could have used the software, the Pioneer software, to be able to build our project and put our samples in there and get it all ready for this. But to be honest, the interface on the DJS is actually really quite simple once you get used to it. And it's actually a doddle to get stuff in there and start making your tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the USB in there to start with exactly the same way as we would with the CDJs. Remember, this is pretty much exactly the same layout as the CDJ. So the USB is in there and we can now start building up our project. Now, you have projects on a stick and on a DJS, and that you can be whatever you want it to be. For example, I have a project which is my live set, which has all the different elements that I might use in a live set. So drum hits and synth stabs and maybe a few vocals in there. Those are things that I use within a set, and that I've done as a project. So that's an individual project on its own. However, what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a project as a track. So we're going to load this project up like it would be a track. And instead of obviously it just being a single track, it's going to have all the different elements that we can then put together. So when you first start the DJS up, it comes with a blank project, so just an empty project. But you can always hit the project screen and create a new one if you want to. That will obviously erase anything that's been there before. So we got our project on the screen now, and if you've been using Ableton, then it might look familiar. If you've been using any type of MPC or sampler of any sort, then yeah, this is going to look really similar to you. So we've got 16 slots here, 16 different pads that we can assign stuff to. And where you put stuff is totally up to you. Now, I tend to put things in the same place for each track and each project that I have, just so I kind of know where things are. So, for example, the bottom row, I would probably have my drums, maybe even some drums on the second row up. On the third row, I might have synths or a bass sound or whatever. And then on the top row, I might have effects or vocals. That's just how I do it myself. It's up to you how you do it. But keeping the same format each time can really help you, because if you're going between projects, then knowing where these things are means you don't have to kind of relearn different patterns or different layouts for each individual project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to load up the kick drum. That was the first thing we exported, and to be honest, that's the bedrock of our track. So I'm going to load it into the very first slot on there, the bottom left. And I'm just going to do that by clicking on the screen. We've got a whole load of options within here that you can use to then manipulate that sound once you've got it in there, but I'm going to click browse for now to get the track in there. Now we've got two different sources within here. We have internal and USB. So the internal is a little internal hard drive which has a few samples already in it. I'm not quite sure how big it is, but there's enough room to store some samples within there. However, most of the things you're going to have are all going to be on your USB, which is why we're preparing it on our USB. So I'm going to go into the USB here. And again, we've got the same browse knob that you have on a CDJ. So you turn it and then click it in to access it. So I'm going to go into the USB, and it's got all the folders from our samples folder. So this is all the samples that we got on here. I can then go down to tracks, and within there we can see all the different folders within here. And if I go down to the Soul Divide folder, the one that we just created with all the samples in, I can click in there and I've got all my samples within here. Now what I can do is I can turn preview on so I can listen to any of these. So I can actually preview these as I scroll through them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the kick in. So I'm just going to click the stick in there. That loads it into slot 1. Now we could go back to the main screen and then select another pad and then load in another thing, but you can actually do it all within here. So as long as you've got all these functions off, so you've not got any of these functions on, and I'm going to show you some of these when I get in a minute so we can kind of see these kind of things. So as long as you've got none of these on, so they're not lit, then we can go to pad 2, for example, and then we can load something else in here. So in here, I might load the drums. So I'm going to load that into slot 2. And then slot 3. So we've got the yo in here. Now, as I say, I'd usually put vocals at the top, but this is more of a drum kind of hit, something that goes within the drums. So I'm going to put this on the bottom row, just so I've got that within there.
It's such a good.
We've also got the crash within here, so I'm going to load that into the 4th one. Now on the 2nd row, what I think I'm going to do is start loading some of my instruments and things like that. So I'm going to load the bass in here. So I think bass in there, and then the 2nd one, load in there. And let's load the stab and the stab loop into these 2 slots here as well. And then we're going to load I'm going to load the siren into this next one. And then the ambience into this one. And I think we got most of that done there. So I'm now going to move. I'm not going to put anything in this one just here for the moment. I'm going to put the vocals in the top here.
It's such a good vibration.
So I'll put the full vocal in there.
Good vibration. It's such a
So I put the sucha in there.
vibration.
And then good vibrations in there.
It's such a good vibration.
And put the full one in there. And actually we've actually got the good stab, so I'm going to put that in there. So we've now loaded everything up. As you can see, all the pads are nicely lit. So I can now see everything's in there. If I click the home button, it will take me through and you can see all of the different samples are within the screen. Now, as I say, it's really important to name your samples so that they're nice and short and you kind of understand what they are straight away. If you look at the Vox Good Vibrations, for example, that's already cut off. So you haven't got that many characters to fit in there. So make sure it's something that can describe what you want it to be. Okay, so let's get in and edit the pads now. So this is where we're going to start setting up all the pads to be what they're going to be when we play them back. So the first pad is the kick, and that's a one shot. So that's an individual kick. So we've got that set up within there. We all have we have time stretch off, loop off, and trigger mode is one shot. So those are kind of the defaults when you first load up the DJS, and that's kind of perfect for the kick. It's got everything that we want it to be. I always turn velocity off, to be honest, because I don't tend to use it that much, so I kind of turn that off. But you can turn it on if you want to trigger different velocities for that individual hit. So we've got the kick there. If I go to the top, now this is going to be a loop. This is going to continuously play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn loop on, and I'm also going to turn time stretching on and put it to master tempo. It time stretches it so that it all fits in nicely. So we've got that within there. Next up, we've got the yo sound.
Yo.
And again, this is just one shot. That's absolutely fine. We don't need to change that at all. Crash, exactly the same. I've got our bass patch in here, our bass loop rather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that on as a loop, because that's a loop. And again, turn the time stretching to master tempo. And for bass 2, exactly the same, that's a loop. So let's turn that on to master tempo for time stretch, loop on. Stab, we have, this is the individual stab, so we've got it on its own. So we've got that within there, so I can leave that as is. Our stab loop is a loop. So again, we want to turn loop on, and I'm going to turn the time stretching onto master tempo. Now the time stretching, you can experiment with that to see how you want it to be. Master tempo does a decent job, but sometimes you might want to turn it off. It's completely up to you. Next up, we've got the siren. Now, technically, that is kind of a loop. We kind of made it as a loop, and we could do it as a loop, but I'm just going to keep it as a one shot for now because it works quite nicely. We also have the scratch loop. So again, I'm going to turn the loop on for that, and it'll keep looping until I stop it. And in fact, I might even turn loop off because I don't really want the loop on there for that. So I'm going to turn loop off on that one. I'm going to put the time stretching to master tempo though. Ambience, again, this is a loop. This is kind of a loop of ambience, so I'm going to turn the loop on. Again, master tempo on my time stretch. We've got the stab. Again, just a one-shot stab. That'll do fine. We've got the full vocal. Now, all of these are going to be kind of loops, but we can kind of do other stuff with them, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. So I'm going to turn them all onto loop. Again, master tempo on the time stretch. And we got them all within there. Now, we might need to kind of tweak this as we go on. Some of them might not work for loop. They might do, they might not. So we'll see how we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start building the track up to be what it would be at the very maximum. So all the elements are in there and they're playing as they should do. So first off, I'm going to put the kick in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up a 4/4. And I'm going to take the volume down a bit as well, just so we got a bit of headroom within there. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to extend it. At the moment, it's just one bar. And I'm going to take it up to 4 bars here by extending it up to 4 bars there. And this is because a lot of our loops are longer, so that will come in handy. Next up, I'm going to put the tops loop in there, and again, I'm just going to trigger that from the first beat because it is just a loop and it's going to play through. Again, just adjusting the volume there just to kind of mix things in. And one thing you'll notice already is that it's playing back quite slow. That's because we haven't set the BPM of our project yet. It's probably something I should have done at the start, but we can do that at any point. So I'm going to click on the BPM, and the standard BPM for the project is 120 BPM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase it to 124 BPM, which was the original BPM of the project. And I'm also going to add some swing into it as well, because some of the elements are going to need a bit of swing. A lot of my tracks have got swing in them, so I'm going to increase this to somewhere in the region of about 60%. But that's totally up to you. That's your own kind of thing. And also, it's not going to affect your recording as well. When you start putting this stuff in, you can adjust the swing later, and it will make everything swing at that new swing. So it is something that you definitely can change a bit later. So I'm going to click home again, go back to the home. So let's try this out. So we got that within there. Let's get the yo sound in there, and I think it happens somewhere about here.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to take the volume right down on this.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to put a crash in at the very start as well. Now that's really loud, so let's turn the volume down on that.
Yeah.
So we got that within there. Next up, I'm going to put the bass in there, and this couldn't be any easier. This part, you just literally, again, I'm going to put it on the first beat, and then it's going to play that loop through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got the bass playing there nicely. In fact, it's a little bit quiet, so I'm going to just pump up the volume a little bit on that. Also, something I said about is that I exported it without any side chaining in. So at the moment it will clash with the kick drum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a special effect within the bass sample here. So I'm going to click onto here, and you can see this is where it starts telling us more information about the sample. Now there's a whole load of stuff within here, but I'm going to look at the effects section. I'm going to click on effects, and then I'm going to click on select effect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a ducker in there. So the ducker is the same thing as the sidechain. It ducks whatever the incoming signal is. Now the first thing we want to assign is the source. So this is what it's going to duck. And we want to assign that to track 1, which is our kick. Next up, we have a whole load of different settings that we can use to tweak this a bit more. So we have the attack, so how fast the ducking comes in. We have the curve, so how gentler it kind of comes in. Now I usually set this kind of usually at 0. I don't usually change this much. The release is how long it ducks for. Again, you can tweak this as you go along. It depends on the length of your kick drum. So rather than using the side chaining method where a compressor would detect how long that kick is, you're actually doing it here via controls. So you've got more control over it, but it will take a little bit of time to kind of get that kind of sound. So we can adjust the release as we go and see how that sounds. And again, we've got a curve on the release as well. So we can just make that a bit more gentle. So let's just see how that goes.
Yo. Yo. Yo.
So there we go, we've got that ducker now, that's ducking every time the kick hits. And we also want to do exactly the same on the second bass. So I'm going to start the second bass off, and again, I'm going to put the ducker in here. So I'm going to put the ducker in there. Again, assign the source as track number 1, that's the kick, that's what you're ducking. And then I'm going to adjust these as we play it.
Yo.
So there we go, we've already got the kick, we've got the drums within there, we've got a little bit of vocal in there, both basses are in there now as well. Next up, we'll get the stab in there. Now we can do this in 2 different ways. We can either do the stab as just a single one hit, or we can do it as the loop. So we can either record it in ourselves using the stab here.
Yo.
So I'm literally just jamming along there with the track and just hitting the stab wherever I kind of feel like it. But the DJS has got this amazing quantization in it where you can just hit the pad and it will do it to the nearest beat. That even works if you've got swing on as well. So you're not even going to be out of swing. It's going to be with that swing, which makes it a really great bit of kit to kind of perform with and try it out. Now, as I say, we can record whatever I'm doing in here and then that will be recorded onto the unit so I can then play it out next time and it'll be there. Or I can just key it in using the arrangement at the bottom. So I think in this case, I'm going to record it. So I can arm the record whenever I'm ready to record, and then I can just hit the sequence as I'm doing it. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to run through once, figure out what I'm doing, and then record it maybe the second or the third time.
Yo.
So there we go, it's kind of recorded those stabs as I was doing them. I'm remixing it as we go here because these are not the original timings for that stab, but I'm just kind of just riffing off it and playing around with it. So at certain points in the night, maybe you might want to kind of just start remixing it. You might want to clear that arrangement and just put in the stabs whenever you want to as you're playing it. And you can play more over the top. So I've got whatever it's in there at the moment.
Yo.
So I can start jamming over the top of it. And this is where it starts getting really interesting. So you can start adding bits in where they perhaps weren't before, but it still keeps going in the background. You're not ruining anything. Unless you press record and you're arming record, you can just keep jamming out and then you can just play around with it. So we have the stab in there. We're not going to use the stab loop for now because that kind of works, but we do have that as a fallback if we wanted to put that in there. Next up, I'm going to put the siren in there. And again, this is another thing that you can just jam out as you're playing away. So you can see that I'm just playing it off there, but what I'll do is I'll put it at the start of the bar because that's generally where it is within the track.
Yo.
So there we go, we've got the siren in there. Let's put the scratch in there. Now the scratch only happens once in the track, or once or twice in the track, but you could actually program it in, or you could do it live in real time.
Yo.
So there we go. I put the scratch within there, and I might want to put that in. I probably won't want to do it every single bar, so I can kind of, I might come up with a variation for that in a bit, which I'll show you how I do that in a second. But for now, we're going to leave that out there, and let's see what the ambience is. So I might not even program that one in there because that's something that happens once or twice in the track, and I can just hit it just to kind of perform with it. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that one. Let's get the vocals. The vocals are the coolest part, so let's try that. So I'm going to turn the loop off of that because it's going to keep on going until I stop it. So I've turned the loop off for that. So basically once you hit the pad, it will keep on looping and looping and looping, which I think is something that's not really going to work for this. So I'm going to turn that off. But what I can do is I can then program it in on the sequence if I want to.
Yo.
So there we go. We've got that loop within there now. The such a loop. So that's going in the background there. In the actual track, I kind of filter it in and out, and I can do exactly the same thing with the DJS as well. So one thing we haven't looked at yet is the effects. We've actually got an effects knob in here and a way of turning it on and off. But also within here, we have a way of being able to assign it to different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the low pass filter within here to kind of take the top end out almost on that particular instrument though. So within here I can choose what effect I've got, and there's some amazing effects within here, but I can also choose which track it affects. So at the moment it's affecting all of them, and what I can do is I can just deselect all of these until I've got the actual vocal. So I've just got that vocal there. That is what that effect is affecting. So I can now use this to kind of almost kind of sweep it in and out. So there you go. You can actually, the effects are really powerful because you can choose whatever channel you want to affect. I might want to do this on all of the vocals, for example. So I'm going to select all of those vocals, and I might want to use that just to kind of filter them in and out. Now, at the moment, that obviously that vocal is going in and out. So what I want to do is I am going to mute it. Now that's one of the things, they're one of these function buttons up here, and the muting is fantastic for bringing things in and out. So if I hit mute mode, I can hit any of these pads to then take one of them out. Now this is a fantastic thing for performance because you can just literally take different parts of the track out. Now when you're playing a track out on CDJs, then you've got no choice but other than like kind of affecting it with effects, or you can take the low end out using the low cut on the mixer. You've got very kind of little that you can do with the original track. You can't really remix it as such. There's nothing you can really do to affect the elements within the track. But with here, I can take out whatever elements I want to. So if I wanted to take out the kick, I can mute the kick, for example. So there you go, as you can see, I can start muting things as and when I want to. And another little kind of hidden feature within here is that you don't have to you can take everything out and then bring it all back in at once. So say for example, I've muted the kick and the drums, and I've muted the bass and everything else like that. Now I could click all of those at once to kind of bring them all back in again, but you can hold down shift and hit mute to unmute everything. So kind of a little kind of hidden feature within there. If you go into the manual, you'll find loads of different little features like that. So we got the base of our track there. That's kind of most of the elements and the kind of the main meat of the track. But what I want to do is kind of come up with some other variations of that. So maybe at some points I won't want that vocal going in throughout. I'll probably want it to be maybe just the beats and the bass and stuff. Now I can set all of that up beforehand. That first thing that we've just created here is the first pattern. So if I click the pattern button, we have up to 16 patterns that we can kind of come up with for these samples. So we can go through and we can start coming up with different variations of how we want to do this. So let's say, for example, we want to take this main element, but we don't want the vocal within there. Well, what I can do is I can click on the scene pattern button here, and we can see here that we have the patterns there, 1 to 16. Now the scenes are a bit more complex, which I'm not going to get into today. Basically, they allow you to have multiple sets of samples. But for today, and because we're just doing the one track, we only really need one scene. So we have 16 patterns within here, and pattern 1 is the one that we're on at the moment. What I can do is I can, once I've selected that, I can click copy, which copies it, and then I can go to the second pattern and I can paste it in there, which creates a second pattern based exactly on the first one. So we can see here that we have 2 lights here. I can switch over to that second pattern, which it already is. And now I can start making edits to it. So say, for example, I can go out pattern and I can get rid of this, this vocal. So again, I'm going to take it out of here. And if we play it back. So there we go, we got the whole main meat of the track, but without the vocal. And what I can do is via the pattern button, I can jump between these. So at the moment it's on pattern 2, which has no vocal in at the moment, and pattern 1 has the vocal. So I can jump between these. So we can go through and we can create all these different patterns, which are different variations of what we're going to play. Generally, sometimes with these kind of tracks, I might even build the track up using the patterns. So maybe the first couple of patterns might be me introducing the drums, then me introducing the bass, then me introducing the synth, and kind of build it up almost like a sequence like you would in Ableton. That is totally up to you. However, what I tend to do a lot these days is kind of create the main meat of the track and then just take stuff out using the mute. That tends to be really good, and it's a really easy way to kind of DJ with the track. So for example, I've got that vocal in there, but I can easily just use the mute to get rid of that vocal.
Good vibration, good vibration, good vibration.
now we have those two patterns, those two variations, one with the main beat with the vocal in and one with the main beat without it. And maybe we can start playing around with that. So I can be doing the such a loop, and then after taking that out, I can then play something else, for example. So you're setting these patterns up in the way that you want to perform, however you want to kind of deconstruct that track and then reconstruct it live. You can choose how you want to bring things in and out, and the patterns make it really easy to kind of create almost templates from where you can then play on top of it. So you know that most of these elements are already all good to go, and because it's all looping up, it will just keep going forever. So you can keep just playing and jamming over the top of it and doing whatever you want to do with it. But the whole point is that you're kind of setting it up like that, so you're kind of creating the way that you're going to live perform this track. So now we've got everything in there. Let's kind of concentrate on some of the stuff that we can do now that it's in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the second pattern, which doesn't have the vocal in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing around with the stab sound. Now, if I click on the stab sound, what I can do is I can put it into scale mode, which kind of creates almost a piano out of it, a synth out of it, and I can play it like that. So I don't have to play the original note at the original note that it is at. I can actually move it up and down the keyboard, so I can start playing around.
Yo.
So as you can see, it's really kind of fun just to kind of play around with. And maybe if I was doing that, maybe I'd get rid of the original pattern. So it's just maybe the bass and the drums, and I've not got a pattern set in there for the stab. So I might have that as a separate pattern where I know that that's the one that I can start jamming out and start playing around with the pad. So that's kind of a cool way of using the scale. And you can do this with any instrument within there. You could even do it with the vocal if you wanted to. How well it sounds in the live set is totally up to you, but that is one of my favorite things to kind of do. I like to kind of jam out, and the fact that you can play it like a keyboard and start playing different melodies than it was in the original, people will then know it's a remix and you're kind of doing it live, which is really kind of cool. And the final trick I kind of want to go through is the slicing feature on the DJS. Now this can kind of really create some really interesting stuff. Now I exported the full vocal from this track, and it's probably something that I wouldn't be able to play along just naturally as it is. We'll see how that sounds.
Yo.
It's such a good vibration.
Yeah, it doesn't really kind of go in time with what you want it to be. But what I can do is I can take that full sample and chop it up. I can use the slicing feature within the DJS to kind of choose different slices to map across the pads. So this is really interesting. If I go into slice mode, this automatically slices that sample into 16 parts that you can then play across here.
It's such a good vibration.
The actual pads themselves at the moment aren't set quite right. They're not quite how you want them to perform, but this is where we start going in and tweaking. If I hold down the slice feature, it takes me into slice mode, and I can start then assigning these pads and where the start and end points are, each of these pads are played from. So for example, this second one,
It's such a
it's not quite clean. So what we can do is we can start adjusting this.
It's such a good. It's
So you can really start jamming out over the top of tracks now that you've got this kind of cut up, which is really cool. So if I go back and start playing this.
Yo. It's such a good. It's such a good. Yo. It's such a. It's such yo. It's such a.
So as you can see there, it's really kind of cool. It's good to kind of chop this kind of stuff out. Now those cuts are sounding very static at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go into effects and I'm going to put a delay effect perhaps on it. The delay will kind of make it feel a little bit less cutty maybe. So that's just me jamming out, playing around with these sounds and seeing what I can do. Now I'm probably going to spend a whole load more time on this just to kind of get everything up to scratch, figure out what I'm going to do in my live set. So what kind of ideas, what kind of routines I can do with this track. I might do some more mixing, make sure all the levels are just correct on it. I might even get some more stuff off my computer and put that within here or tweak some of the samples. But for the most part, that is kind of what I do when I kind of prepare my tracks for the DJS. Now, as you can see, it's really quite simple. All you need is a DAW, which obviously you have if you're producing your own tracks. Cubase, Logic, Ableton, all work exactly the same. You just need to export your samples to a USB stick, whack them in the DJS, and there you go. You've got them all within there and you can get these projects set up within minutes. As far as performance goes, it's all about practice as well. You've just got to kind of play around with this as much as you can, get used to where all the samples are, how they play back, and just come up with some ideas, some routines. Scratch DJs have routines that they do all the time in their sets, and they've practiced them and they know what they're doing. This is exactly the same kind of thing. Now, my sets won't necessarily consist of me doing this throughout the whole set. I might have 3 or 4 tracks that I might do like this, but then again I might have 90% of the time I might be on the decks. So you can do as much or as little of this as you want to. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. You set it up how you want to and how you want to play, and then you can start jamming out as much as you get comfortable with. And you'll get better as you go along. You'll do more things as you go along, as you kind of rely on this bit of kit. And yeah, things will go wrong, as with all performers. You might, hit the wrong note or something might go out of time or whatever else like that. But just rely on this bit of kit and practicing. That's the main thing, just practicing with this bit of kit and making sure that you've got it all set up how you want it to. I always think that preparation is one of the best things that you can do. And certainly with this, if you've got everything prepared, you've got all your patterns prepared, you've got everything in there and you've practiced with it, then you can just have fun in your sets. And let's face it, when you're kind of doing this and you're creating live remixes on the fly, it's going to be different every single set. And the crowd are going to love it as well, because you are creating something live for them. And they'll see that. They'll see them doing that kind of stuff. And there's no greater feeling than actually kind of doing this stuff live. Now, there's a whole load of other ways that I use the DJS in my set, and I'm going to be doing a video on that really soon. But for now, I just kind of want to leave you with this, kind of show you how I get my tracks out of Ableton and into the DJS. Hopefully this has inspired you. Hopefully this gets you on board with the DJS. If you're a DJ producer, then I can't recommend it highly enough. It really adds that extra element to your sets, and it's a lot less complicated than you might think. So I hope you've enjoyed that video. Remember to give it a like on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification icon so you always get notified when I put a new video up. I've got a whole load of new stuff on the way, DJing, production, and I'm going to be doing a whole load more stuff on the DJS-1000 and also the SP16 and AS1. So lots of Pioneer goodies on the way.